Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Craig Hayton. I'm Community Services Director for the City of Tempe, and I just wanted to first say thank you so much, whether you're joining us live here on the 20th at noon or you're choosing to watch the video after the fact. It really is something that I appreciate that you're taking the time to join us and hear about some of the updates that we have, gather feedback. This really is our second opportunity to interact with the community around the events and parks ordinance. We had some outreach back in October and November, and you'll be hearing a little bit about what we heard from that as we move through the presentation. I am just one of a deeper team and a deeper bench here in the Tempe side that is working through these parks and special event ordinances, but we're relying upon the community to really help us make sure that we get this right. We have 4 meetings over the course of the next just over a week. Public meetings, the one that we have today at noon, obviously, the virtual, we have 3 in person, one this afternoon or this evening at North Tempe Multi-Gen at 6 p.m., one tomorrow, Tuesday, the 21st over at Kiwanis Rec Center, and then a week from today on the 27th in the bottom of the public library in the Desert Willow Room. So we appreciate the opportunity. You're welcome to join us for each and every one of those. As Shauna mentioned, just a little bit of housekeeping. We are taking questions as they come up. I will have a slideshow, so I'll go off of video. We do have slide numbers at the bottom right of the slideshow. So if you have a question about a particular slide, please note that in the question. I'll be happy to pull it back up and elaborate a bit more. Part of my goal today really is to provide an overview of the information and the updates that we have. We've just gone live with the information, so we recognize that many people have not seen any or much of the information. So my goal first is to really provide a conceptual overview of the information. Second, then we're going to rely upon you as I look at answering questions that you may have to where I can provide some clarification on some areas that may not be clear just conceptually. And then certainly as you sit with the code updates, that's where we get into the legal language that hopefully we're reinforcing what we're sharing today with the conceptual items. We're able to actually work those through in that all-important legal language that's going to provide some clarity. So questions in the chat, please refer to the slide if there is one. And then second, we're not going to be taking at the virtual meeting public comments in a verbal format, but you're welcome to put some comments in the chat. We'll make sure that they are captured. And then we're going to do our best at the public meetings to give everybody one opportunity to share if they've got some comments and would like to make a statement as part of those public meetings tonight, tomorrow, and then next Monday. And we'll capture those as part of our public record as well as the slideshow that we have. So I'm going to go off a video now. I'm going to share my presentation. I do, again, appreciate the opportunity to provide this overview. And I do look forward to having an opportunity to answer some questions, but also point you to a public survey, or if you have any questions, my information is listed on the project website. But thank you so much for taking the time to be here. My hope really today, as we provide an overview of the events and park ordinance, is that we're able to be really clear you should be clear looking at public code, regardless of what activity you're looking at doing, of what's allowed, what's not allowed, and then what you need to get permission to do on public spaces. And that's my hope, is that you would be able to kind of come away with those answers as you interact with our public code or our signage that reflects public code in some of our public spaces, especially within our public parks. So our goal is to have clear rules, but also better pathways to supporting active spaces as we look at really providing valuable recreational experiences, whether those are through our special events or through our parks and recreational spaces. So we want to balance shared access alongside making sure that we're providing safety and really valuable experiences for folks who choose to utilize their spaces, and also recognizing that our parks really are hubs of many of our neighborhoods. We're very fortunate here in Tempe. I'm a Tempe resident, raising my family in Tempe, so I know this is important to myself and my family as well. So a little bit of an overview of where we're headed. I'll go through just a brief bit of information on some background information as part of the presentation today and what we will be covering. I would love to review the information identified that we were able to pull out of the fall outreach opportunity that we have. If this is your first chance to really interact with us, we appreciate you being here. But we did have some fall outreach in October, November. That survey report is available online with some of our resources that we have. And then would love to then bridge into how that outreach has helped shape the code updates that I'll be spending the majority of our time going through. Then I'll point us to our next steps and then questions. And then again, for this virtual meeting, our public comments really are going to be focused. If you have some, we would love to track those, but please put them in the comment box. So certainly with the questions, we'll take those. We want to make sure that we clarify with the time that we have together. But we were not going to be taking statements as part of this virtual meeting just based on its time and our ability to manage the virtual meeting. So love to start with some important scope and background, what we're going to cover. Again, as I mentioned, the goal is to provide an overview of the updates, both to the special events and then the parks and recreation codes that oftentimes work together. And then with that, we're looking to the community to identify ways for us to make it better, to provide better clarity, usability, again, so that we're then providing shared access to our public spaces, but also balancing that out with making sure that access happens in the right way. And while it's going to be important to talk through specific organizations or enforcement situations, that's not going to be what we're covering as part of these outreach opportunities. I'm happy to have conversations as much as I can talk through that, or anything that really isn't part of our code for parks and special events. My goal really is to have us focus on the code updates and then how we can make those better. So this is really that first opportunity for you as a community member to see what we're proposing as some updates, and I'll get into those here specifically in a bit. So you may be asking why we're actually embarking on this effort. This has certainly been a significant effort. We've got a deep Tempe team that's working through it. We know there's going to be a lot of interest from the community. We know that Tempe has grown and the demand and use of public spaces has really evolved over the years. When you just look at the Rio Salado parks, Tempe Beach Park, and the special events that we host there, it's really evolved over the past 25 years. And we want to make sure, and that's just one example, we want to make sure that we're actually being good stewards of public spaces by making sure that our code actually does reflect and support how parks and public spaces are utilized, whether it's drop-in activities, organized activities, and even our special events. And it really does reflect how those spaces are utilized today so that the entire community then can benefit from clearer rules, but better pathways. And ultimately, if there's organized activities, we want to make sure that they are occurring. And that's part of our permit pathways is make sure that activities are supported, that occur in the right place at the right time and through the right processes. We see permitting as a key component to giving somebody permission to do something, and we want to make sure that we as stewards of public spaces are doing that in a respectful way for the environment, but also for the activity that's taking place, really to make sure that we're seeing and realizing the biggest benefit as possible as a community. So with that, we thank everybody that provided input back in our fall outreach, October and November of 2025. We conducted 4 public meetings, very similar format. We had a kickoff that was virtual. We had 3 in-person meetings over the course of a couple weeks, and then we had a public survey period that was open, similar to what we have now. We were fortunate that we received almost 350 individual responses. About half of those folks actually took the time to provide us some open-ended comments as well. And we really value and appreciate everybody that took the time to provide that information, not just with the specific questions that we asked, but also just in identifying, what your proximity is to some of the spaces that we're actually talking about here. And as we can see, 75% of people self-identified as living or owning a business within a walking distance of a park. So we know that that's hyper proximate to the spaces that we're managing and stewarding, but also that we've got folks that either utilize our parks or attend special events multiple times throughout the year. And with that, we asked 5 key questions as part of our survey. I'll provide some information on what we heard next, but we just asked basic information on who you are, what your tie to the parks are. We asked about your experiences on the park side as well as special events and what your patterns, permit experiences are. We also asked some very open-ended questions on how we could actually draft a better code. But I do want to pause for a sec on our reference to the July 2025 version, the version that was rescinded that we couldn't utilize, that were really identified as a reference point. But it may not have been something that I did the greatest job conveying why we were looking for some feedback on that version, knowing that we couldn't reproduce it in its current form. We really had some key goals as part of that July 2025 code, those updates, to provide clarity and flexibility. So we just wanted to gauge how well we had actually done with that. And as we get into the next slide, for the next 2 slides, I will cover really the quantitative information from both of those, the special event and the park permit ordinance, how folks felt. And again, the survey report is online. I'm providing a little bit of a different format. And I don't want to get into question by question, but I'd love to just point out some of the trends that we saw here. Again, our goal was to see whether you agreed or disagreed or somewhere in between that the 2025 version provided clearer guidance or alternative permit options. And my takeaway isn't necessarily the answers to the individual questions, it's the groupings of the agree, strongly agree on one side, the disagree, strongly disagree, and then even the neutral, that we really didn't have any broad support either way. There was a significant amount of folks disagreed or were neutral, but we saw at about a 50% clip that folks agreed. So that we knew that we could do better providing a clearer code moving forward. On the special event side, there were 8 questions that we asked, as you can see here, and we really do move forward through that with some general information and responses. We actually had 5 different kind of columns on this. I have just grouped them for this. And again, the survey report is available online. And then we see similar groupings on the park use permit side, where we see about 50% of the folks agreed and strongly agreed with our goal. Again, understanding that there were some concerns about the way the questions were written, but we do see that there were a significant amount of folks that were neutral or had significant or disagreed within that as well. So really helpful information for us to focus on providing clarity and usability. And then we looked at the quantitative information, what we received in the open survey responses. Within the report, you can read through each and every comment that was listed in there, as well as some of the emails that we received. Within the open comments on the special event side, there was a desire for clearer rules, and there was also some concerns about thresholds. We'd identified that for the first time within the 2025 version. A threshold of 30 people would qualify as a special event, but also some concerns about discretion and fairness. On the park use side, there was a desire to really protect informal, kind of drop-in traditional park, casual parks and recreational use, keeping permits affordable, and then clearer guidance on where permits would apply and where they wouldn't. I think because we had a significant single document that tied in special events and parks use back in the July ordinance, there was a lot of confusion about what permit was available that was on the special event side versus the park and recreation side. Again, our goal really is to provide a bit more clarity around that. And then on open-ended feedback, I'm really distilling down a lot of great information. We have between 150 to 175 open comments. I have read through them, the teams read through them. But the overall themes that we pulled out of it on the open-ended feedback, to really distill it down to 2 key takeaways, is that the community really is looking for clearer language, understanding it is going to be legal language, and then also more consistent application. So that affects the ability for somebody to read through code and then somebody to apply code. And that somebody could be our team as much as it could be somebody within the community itself looking at hosting an activity or figuring out if they could just drop in and utilize a space. So some key takeaways then from the survey, again, not to distill what was a significant amount of outreach and input into 3 distinct points, but as we saw from that quantitative slide, the slides that had the 8 questions on both the parks and the special events ordinance, that we saw the perspectives were really mixed, but there was real support for clearer rules and a desire to see code that is easier to understand and more predictable. And also, we need to be mindful around informal uses, thresholds, and then also discretion. And some of that we can clarify within code, and some of that is just how code language is actually identified with who is the person that's actually responsible for implementing the code and overseeing those elements. So taking that together, all of that information, the wonderful input that we got from the public outreach from October and November, it really reinforced our desire to create a modern code. And with a modern code, it's going to really stand on those 2 key pillars of making sure that community can readily understand the code. If you go to the code to look for some direction, you should be able to understand what it means, understanding that it is a legal document, but at the same time that our team understands it and then can apply it readily. So if somebody reaches out and says, hey, I'm looking at doing this, can you help me manage this process? Because I think this is the best way to go about doing that. We want to make sure that we can actually have the community understand it, and then our staff take it to the next level to make sure that we can actually apply it from there. With that, as we looked at creating a code that was understandable and applicable, we really did look at three components: the structure of the code, how it was laid out. You'll see a significant rewrite with the special events code. And then the content within that structure, what is included within it, and what level of detail provides, because all three of those things working together really helps provide a more understandable code. We also prioritize clarity and usability based on the information that we received from the community through our public outreach. And then ultimately, as we talk about a modernized code, we want to make sure that it supports current use, but also just we recognize that we were a community among communities within the region. We want to make sure that we're consistent with what is happening across the Phoenix metro area, understanding that each community, each activity, each use, each park system, each special event portfolio really does act in different ways, but the hope is that we can really lean and learn from each other as we look at creating codes that support the entire regional base, especially when you look at a recreational system and special events. We have such, folks moving from different areas coming in, potentially even from out of town hosting special events. We do want to make sure that we are regionally aligned with that as well. So now I would love to spend hopefully the next 10 or so minutes talking through code updates, wrap up, and then get to questions, understanding again, I've got I've got slide numbers in the bottom right. So we're on slide 15 currently. We really have identified code updates in four different buckets, and we're addressing them separately so we can provide hopefully a better avenue for clarity for feedback that we can receive so that we can show some distinction between these kind of four different elements. We're looking at the special events code. There's a significant rewrite. We've added a lot more language to provide some clarity and some flexibility within that, understanding that the current special event code as it's written really is a one size fits all. And that's some of the criticism that we had received, is that no matter how complex the event, there is the at least 60-day time period, and then there are fees that are associated with that. Are there ways that we can actually make that more simple? And I think we found some ways to do that. Again, we're leaning upon the community to see how we can make that even better. And then on the Parks and Recreation Code, that is a standalone chapter 23 that supports our parks and our preserves. Again, you should be able to know what you can do, what is prohibited, and then when you need to get a permit for. And sometimes within that, we've got rules for use in parks and preserves. We're identifying how parks are utilized, some activities that are prohibited. The broadening of our beer and wine and amplified sound permits, mostly to bring us in line with the way that the industry is and state liquor laws are working. And then finally, we'll spend some time talking through new park permit options. And again, with the goal of providing flexibility and usability so that everything doesn't have to run through special events, we're broadening some of the permit options that we have and then creating some additional new ones just based on how our public spaces are and can be used so that we can actually support that moving forward. So I am, again, talking conceptually here on something that there's a lot of time and effort has gone into, and there's a lot of verbiage online. The draft code language is listed online, and we do ask that you take the time to read through it, get familiar with it. We unfortunately cannot touch on all of these updates as we talk through this specifically on slide by slide. But on special events specifically, we've completely rewritten the code, added what was previously 3 pages. I think we're with the ordinance up front, we're 12 or 13 pages. The ordinance just identifies that it will need to go through 2 public hearings at some point through mayor and council to actually adopt those codes. But we've created a clearer structure and flow for special events specifically. So previously it was a section within chapter 5. It now has its own article with headers. It's got a logical flow. It identifies its purpose. It identifies key terms that are used. And it actually moves you through the process of what are the terms, what constitutes a special event, what's the process to apply, what happens if I am denied, what are my appeal rights, or what happens if I host a special event and I don't have a permit specifically. So that flow really is meant to add some clarity and usability. We've added definitions, a key component for us moving forward, really to reinforce clarity and predictability, both from a community and a staff side. And then really want to reinforce that we've added in event tiers. Previously, we have what is probably identified here as that 3rd tier. Everything was a one size fits all. We've added some sub tiers on here just identifying that not everything has to be a significantly complex event requiring the same thresholds and cost to actually produce special events from a permitting process. So we've added tiers with some thresholds. We've identified some new thresholds as some supporting structure. So if you have an event between 50 and 250 people, you'll be at that first tier, 250 to 500, 500 and above, just as one of the triggers for the special event. And then we've identified the spontaneous special events. This was something that we just identified does not have to run through our special events process. We recognize that free speech activity that may be in response, like a protest, to something that is occurring in real time, we're not going to ask that you run through the special event process, but we do want to make sure that we can help support those activities happen in the best time and in the best place and in the best way. And we just ask that you make a phone call and start coordinating with our public safety team so that they can help support and be aware of those activities. Next, we want to better match our timelines and fees to event scale and complexity. Again, that's just a reinforcement of the tiers that we've identified. And then finally, as we look at providing additional clarity, outlining conditions, some of the stipulations that we have for special events, what does it look like for security, for safety, for some of that support infrastructure. And then again, just being clear on the language for denials and appeals. And again, this is just touching the surface conceptually of some of the things that you'll see within the code language. My hope is that you can true up both what I'm sharing here and find it within the code. Second, for rules for use in parks and preserves, we're now shifting over to the Parks and Recreation Code, moving out of Chapter 5 into Chapter 23. We are now identifying within code some things that we've identified administratively in some select parks over the years. Again, to support safe park usage, we've prohibited smoking. We're proposing prohibited smoking, the use of shopping carts within our parks and preserves, and then also limiting unpermitted ramada use to 4 consecutive hours. Again, we've identified those rules within our parks. Current code allows us to do so administratively in some spaces, but we would like to implement that within all of our parks and preserves to support safe uses. We've also prohibited the improper refuse disposal or leaving items behind. So just elaborating a bit more, providing more clarity on littering within that. We have had some challenges where some items have been left behind in parks where somebody wants to donate an item to somebody, but that's not an item that somebody has actually taken with them or utilized. So we are prohibiting items being left behind in a park, but we are identifying in some sense some protections for direct person to person. This is not an organized activity, but person to person donation where items are physically received and then not left behind. So somebody does take possession. If you see somebody hungry and you at one ramada want to go over to another, you're certainly welcome to share that with them. We do want to identify that, but you just can't leave items behind in a park thinking that somebody may be there at a point in the future. We are going to prohibit needle or syringe exchange activity in our parks and our preserves. We've had some concerns with the impacts of needles that we have found in our parks and recreational spaces. And then we're prohibiting unauthorized sales, services, or instructional activity without a permit. I'll touch on that one specifically within the third code update because we are providing a permitting pathway to something that we're prohibiting outside of a permit. So this is probably one of the broader ones, but as we see folks operating businesses within parks, distributing various items, we want to make sure that we're supporting that through a permitting process. And again, permitting means that we are supporting it, but it does need to happen in the right time, in the right place, in the right way. And we want to make sure that we're working with folks on that specifically. Second, beer and wine and amplified sound. We're looking at expanding personal consumption permits. Currently, wine is not identified as beer only, so we do want to expand that. And then we're removing our 3-acre minimum requirement and then a tie to a ramada reservation for the beer and wine permits after sundown. So we're just cleaning up some language on both of those. Again, if somebody's going through the process to seek a permit, we want to make sure that we can support them. Then we're aware of that activity and we can help just be aware and make sure that it's occurring appropriately. And then finally, we're expanding our amplified sound permits beyond currently just 3 named parks between the Rio Salado parks, Tempe Beach Park, and Kiwanis, and then removing Tempe resident only limitation and then adding some other clearer operating standards to make sure that it's respectful of the space. This is not meant to be a concert. This is meant to be just for personal use. And then finally, talk through some new park permit options. We'll spend some time digging into one specifically next that we want to make sure the community is fully aware of. But we are ultimately going to be creating new park-based options that we're trying to pull items out of the special events process and the run through our parks and recreation process. That should help with cost, that should help with timelines, but it also will get folks directly to the folks that are managing our spaces, help alleviate some of the timing impacts on our special event team and the diverse team that supports that throughout the entire organization. And then our Parks and Recreation team can work with key stakeholders, whether it's neighborhood services. We have identified and clarified requirements, what would clarify, or excuse me, what would require a permit. We previously had identified a threshold of 30 people with some discussions and with some feedback that we've received. 50 seems like a more reasonable number and in line with what we see across the valley. If you're looking at, and this is really an expansion of what we currently have, reservable use of an amenity, that will have to be through a permit. You can certainly drop in and utilize spaces. And then we've identified some other organized activities that we do want to make sure are running through the permitting process. And that really then supports, for permits would then support those additional activities. The first one, the exclusive facility or park area reservations permit. This really is just broadening what we currently already offer, where we have ramadas, courts, and fields available for reservation. We want to make sure that we're connecting with the community to see if there are other spaces that we can actually provide a reservable space for folks. Neighborhood park activation permits, bringing neighborhood activations like arts in the parks, but managed through the neighborhood out of the special event zone and bring it in Parks and Recreation, working with Shauna's team with neighborhood services. Our limited park activation permits. This is maybe where you would have more than 50 people, but you're not going to be in one space. Just think of like a run club or a bike club that has more than 50 people. If you don't, that's fine. But if you do have more than 50 people and you're running through, just this is probably going to be more of a notification than anything else so that we can gauge some impacts. Again, start in communication, working through that. And then finally, the organized distribution activity. This is something that I'll dig into a bit more on the next slide with just one of those activities. But this is where somebody is looking at hosting a class in a park where they're taking donations or getting paid to do that, where they're actually vending within a park space. We do want to make sure that that's happening through a permit. But then the one that I do want to speak through and walk through specifically is going to be food distribution permits. And this first, just recognizing this is an activity that has been, continues to occur in parks, and it's certainly allowed within parks. We just want to make sure that we can create a defined permit pathway with clear rules that really help support when, where, and how these activities can occur. And what we've done with that, and you'll see there's going to be a list within the project page and the website that we've identified 30 potential parks located throughout Tempe that could host food distribution permitted events and activities. And with that, we have 52 parks within Tempe. We did want to make sure that we had broad representation for the entire community, that we didn't just focus on 6 parks within the same kind of 2-mile space. But we really did look at within that distribution of some things that really would, more than anything, what would not support a good food distribution event. And that would be, what does it look like to support parking on site and some other key markers with that. So we've started with a list of about 30 spaces that we believe would be fits for that. Some may be better fits than other just based on the amenities that they have and the space that they have. But we would then apply some considerations for frequency. We're looking at, as we propose this, no more than 2 times per month within a park within a 1-mile radius of other parks. Looking at the timing, how would this permit then align with some other permitted park uses? So days and weeks. School proximity, we know that we have many of our parks within Tempe that do have schools next door. How would this food distribution permit align with school days and hours? We'd want to make sure that we don't have those conflicts. And then what are some of the operational considerations for sanitation, whether it's potentially with restrooms, hand washing station, making sure that the food distribution is happening in a safe and sanitary way. And then certainly as we manage this permit administratively, we do want to call it out within city code with some of those considerations, but ultimately they would be site specific, and then we would be able to gauge the impact and the site conditions, and then either make it broader potentially, or tie it back in if we're having some specific impacts based on activities. So recognizing that there are going to be some questions about this, there it is listed within the previous slide, the new park permit options. And we do have a question within our survey that specifically talks through this one specific piece. I know I'm just at a half hour. One last slide here before we get to questions. And again, if you have noted the slide number, I'll be happy to jump back to it. Please complete the online survey. It is now open. Spend some time going through the information that you can find in our special events and parks ordinance page. With that, we have the survey open from April 20th through May 3rd. Sign up for email updates. The QR code on the right-hand side of the screen and on the next slide will give you the ability to sign up for email updates, follow us on social media, share the information with folks that you may believe will have an interest in what we're trying to accomplish here. Again, balancing out shared use and actives and access to public spaces through clear rules and guidelines to make sure that they occur in the right time, in the right place, in the right way to support safety. And then certainly attend future meetings as we look at scheduling them, whether it's one of the in-person meetings that we have now, or the ones that ultimately that we'll be hosting as we make it through this important process. So with that, I'll be happy over the course of the next 25 minutes to take any questions that you may have. And again, we've got the QR code, sign up for any email updates that you would like to receive. And Shauna, I'll leave this up here just if I need to zip back to slides, but if you wouldn't mind helping with questions, I'll be happy to take them.
No, I'm happy to help with questions as well. And just thank you for the comments in the chat. I know that it appears some people um, may be having some trouble accessing the documents. So those were just posted recently. So if you were on the website, you might try refreshing. Um, so we will work on that either way. If you're here in the Zoom meeting, I will have the email you logged in with, so I can also send you um, some of those links and see if we can, if there are any issues. But from what we could tell, it's working on our end. So we will keep going on that. And then the link directly to the Tempe Forum survey is in there as well. Okay, so Craig, now we're ready for questions.
Great, thank you.
David, I have just a couple in the chat that came in first, and then I'll have you come off mute and ask yours. Um, so the first question was asking how the code addresses, which I think you covered in the distribution permits, address groups that do regular and scheduled food distribution in parks.
Yeah, and that was something I know one slide doesn't do it justice, and I recognize that we're gonna have folks with differing opinions on this activity. As I mentioned, it's something that has been occurring. It can occur. We're just creating a defined permit pathway for that so that we can work together with folks. We're looking at hosting those organized activities. And then we have identified that potential list of parks just to make sure that it's spread throughout with some additional operational considerations.
Okay, and then one more question in the chat, and then David will come to you. What about drop-in basketball games, neighborhood potlucks, and other neighborhood gatherings?
Yeah, we're doing all we can to support kind of casual drop-in recreational uses to spaces. If you think that you're going to get beyond 50 people, that seemed to be a more reasonable number for folks. That for drop-in uses wasn't a big deal. And I think the other piece is really working through the permit pathway options of that exclusive facility or park area reservation. If you're hosting something that you're calling people to and you don't know if a Ramada is going to be available, the best way really is to guarantee that reservation by connecting with our team, regardless if you have 5 people or 55 people. So I would encourage you to work through that. The goal really is to manage our spaces, to steward our spaces, and to activate our spaces. Mayor and council have done a great job committing capital funds, our maintenance funds, working with our park rangers. And this really is a way programmatically that we get to help support that through the activation of spaces. So we certainly want to continue doing that.
Okay, and then David, if you want to come off mute and ask your
Good.
question.
Yeah, I'm going to try and be quick, but I have two questions and a comment. So my first is, are there going to be permit fees for less than 50 people?
So it's really going to depend on what the activity is, David. If you're looking at an organized distribution activity and that's going to run through a permit process, we're going to keep that. That's not necessarily something that works through the 50. Certainly 50 would be the trigger. We'll keep it as, we've got reasonable permitting options within the Parks and Recreation side. So, there's a chance. It really depends on what the activity is moving forward. And if
Um,
we're looking for comments in the actual chat, we're not taking verbal comments. So if you could limit to the questions, that'd be fantastic. That gives everybody the opportunity for that. Thank you. You want to, your second question?
I'm sorry, I didn't understand that last part. I'm getting confused.
We're, yeah, up front, we just mentioned while at the public meetings in person, we'll take verbal comments. We're just asking so that we can focus on clarifying questions that folks that are on that have comments, just list them in the chat so that we can capture them that way. We're limiting it to questions only. Thank you.
Okay, well, my second question is if the city is going to continue to allow the syringe exchange program because removing clean needles does not remove dirty needles. And I'm on the CDC website right now, and it says there's 30 years of research that syringe exchange programs are safe, effective, cost saving, and they reduce the transmission of HIV and hepatitis by 50%. So is the city going to continue to allow this policy that is clearly effective?
We have had some significant negative impacts with needle distribution within our parks and our preserves, and currently as identified, we've listed it as a prohibited activity. Thank you, David.
And then also for those of you who aren't or who were having trouble accessing the documents, they are directly linked from the forum question as well, if that works better for you. So the next question, and then we'll get to your hand in a minute, Bobby. Does special event permits coordinate the size of the event with the amount of parking available? I live very near Kiwanis Park, and the large events create a lot of parking violations.
Yeah, thanks for your question. We can certainly connect offline if you've got some specific questions on that. You're welcome to reach out to me. But our events team does work with both the event promoters and also with the very specific departmental reps to make sure that we can maximize the benefits of those events and then minimize any disruptions that may come with that. Certainly, parking would be one of those. I know as somebody who spent a lot of time at Kiwanis Park that those spaces can be very busy. On weekends, whether we've got special events or not. But they would work through that. They do certainly take feedback if things have been more impactful, if you've noticed an uptick for some reason, but would be happy to take that feedback if you have a very specific event and we can work through that offline.
Okay, Bobby, if you want to come off mute, and then we'll go back to the questions in the chat.
Yeah, thank you very much. So first, I do want to say that I appreciate the level of work that has gone into this. Clearly, everybody's put a lot of time and effort into dealing with this important issue. So I do have two questions. My first question is about free speech and assembly activities. So spontaneity is not a requirement of free speech activity under state or federal law. I'm a little concerned that including spontaneity as a requirement for use of a park space which has not been previously reserved through the permitting process, will act as a prior restraint on organized free speech assemblies and activities that are intended to address ongoing crises with no end in sight, such as protests against war, mutual aid to feed the unhoused and financially disadvantaged, and needle exchange programs that provide life-saving health care to individuals facing addiction and poverty. So that is, do the proposed code changes require a permit for these and other free speech and assembly activities that are not spontaneous?
Bobby, thanks for your question. We certainly will work with our attorneys to make sure that, I mean, that's kind of all of the work underneath the tip of the iceberg is, the code language ends up being something we work closely with our attorneys in to make sure that it's legally defensible, and we will continue to, doing that. If there's areas you're concerned about that may not be identified specifically within that, our goal is certainly not to restrict what people say or what they believe. We just need to make sure that we're managing public spaces in such a way by opening up communication first and foremost and identifying what the appropriate pathway is to support those activities. So I don't want to say it really depends, but you listed a few different types of activity. We certainly will work with our attorney's office to make sure that if we need to be clearer on what those would be. But one of them specifically, you mentioned, was the food distribution. We've identified that as a permit pathway. If that's an organized activity, we're pulling it out of special events and pulling it into Parks and Recreation so we can make the process as simple as possible so that we can really determine when, where, and how with those organized activity supporters to make sure that it happens in such a way that is most beneficial to the community and also kind of like what I mentioned with the parking with the previous person, that it's least impactful as well. So recognizing those things happen, we certainly want to work with the community to support whatever we can. It really is going to depend what the activity is and where it's going to be located.
Got it. Well, thank you very much for that clarification. I appreciate it. Kind of leads into the second question, which is about the language of the proposed code changes. So one of the most significant issues with the 2025 ordinance was the use of may approve language as opposed to shall approve language, which created the possibility of arbitrary enforcement of this permitting process. So if an organization or individual completes all of the permitting requirements, will they be guaranteed a permit, or in what circumstances would the city be permitted to deny a permit when all those requirements have been met?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, and I can only imagine if somebody submits an application and they want to host this, for an example, they want to host an event in space A, but they can't for whatever reason. It may not be available. We may not approve it because of that. So I think it's really going to depend on what the activity, when, where, and how it's going to happen. Just making sure that we can pick the best space for that activity. We want to limit discretion as much as possible, but we also want to make sure that we're clear within the legal language that we have some flexibility to work through some unique situations as they occur, just understanding that they may be not the rule, but it may be something that's happening outside of that. So again, I think it may be, our team does a great job walking through special events, especially supporting activities to make sure that they can happen. Somebody has put time, effort, and thought into something. We want to make sure that we match the right activity with the right space to do so. So it's going to depend, but our goal is really to make sure that things do happen. Again, the permitting process is to allow things to happen, and we want to make sure that we're supporting that as long as it's happened at the right time in the right place.
Got it. Thanks very much. If I think of anything else, I'll speak back up, or I'll raise my hand.
Yeah, thank you. And we are taking comments. I know with both. I appreciate you just focusing on questions, but certainly we're happy to capture those comments that are in the chat.
Okay, next question, Craig. How can permits control spillover into parks from a food distribution that is 6 days a week?
Yeah, that's a great question. If it's occurring in the park, we have an opportunity to address any of the activities that are happening in the parks, and the code really helps outline what those requirements would be. And I think that's an important part for the new park permit options so that we can actually work through organized activities. For activities that may be not occurring in the park, that may be impacting park spaces, we're going to continue to make sure that first off, we work with folks who are using spaces that we have. The code of conduct that we have, the rules that we have really are for any park user. And with that, and then if we are having some issues with somebody on private property, we want to make sure that we can reach out to them relationally and just figure out how we can actually resolve some of those issues. Sometimes it can be more complex depending on how it's received. But our hope really is to partner together, just like activities in parks should be benefiting neighborhoods. We'd hope that the opposite would be happening too, where if we have a private space that is negatively impacting a park space, that we can actually work together. One, we're going to hold people accountable for breaking rules, leading with education, but at the same time, the hope would be to connect with the private property owner too, to make sure that they're being good neighbors.
Okay, next question. Asking on behalf of the group exercise community, if I create a Facebook event for a group mountain bike ride or trail run and 20 RSVP, but the actual event, 51 people show up, is my group now in violation and subject to fines?
I think more than anything, we want to open a dialogue to work through that. Nobody's out there counting how many people are in parks. If you anticipate that happening, just give us a call and we'll work through so that we're aware of it. Ultimately, where the rubber hits the road with any of the activities that move through spaces is how they may move through and impact other activities in other spaces. And we just want to be mindful of that and just open up a dialogue. So we wouldn't anticipate there being a massive permitting process that you'd have to go through. But the goal, first and foremost, is just to open up a relationship and communication. We love supporting activities. If you see that regularly it's eclipsing that, then I would say that's probably more of the trigger than anything else. But our team really is there to make sure that we're helping support activation within spaces and actually making sure then that activation is actually occurring in the correct space. So certainly our parks typically can handle 50 plus people, but there may be some spaces where that may be too many people. So open up communication first and foremost. That number is meant to be a guideline. Certainly, if you're expecting more than 50, give us a call and we can work through what the options are. Or if you've noticed you've had 50 for a couple and you think it's just going to be bigger, then we can work through that proactively for the next few times.
Okay, Craig, can you clarify for the proposed amendments to Chapter 23, would it prohibit or penalize the provision of medical services in parks, particularly outreach-based care such as street medicine, wound care, or basic health services?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think I'll need to connect with the team on that one specifically. We would kind of put it into the new park permit option piece, similar to what we've identified within the organized distribution activities. And again, more than anything, the hope is to establish a relationship. If this is an organized activity, that we can work together to figure out the best way for it to happen so that it can be the most beneficial to the people you're trying to serve, but also to the community in which it's happening. So we'd love to just connect and figure out what that looks like. And then if that's through a permitting process, like the organized distribution activity, that's probably the one that it would land in most clearly. Then we can certainly work through what that looks like, potentially using a framework that I identified on the next slide for the food distribution activity.
Okay, next question regarding amplified sound. Would there be a specific decibel level that would be enforced? Amplified sound is one of the biggest issues living near Kiwanis Park.
Yeah, we've not identified any decibel levels, and these would be some of our kind of operating standards that we would look at. Trying to figure out amplification of sound has really been transformed, especially with the Bluetooth speakers. The goal really is just like personal consumption of alcohol. This is meant to be personal consumption of the sound as well, so that it really shouldn't be impactful to your neighbors. And certainly, if you live near the park and that is happening, we want to make sure that we can figure out a reasonable level. Sometimes, though, if this is through a special event, it may not be through an amplified sound permit. That may be something that's a little bit different, that would go through a different process and have different thresholds. But I don't believe the current proposed code updates as written actually identify a decibel level specifically. And I think as an organization, we've gone away from that period.
And then Craig, I don't know if this is in the code, but the question is about lighting for park amenities. Do you want me to send that to park staff, or is that going to be covered under what you currently are amending?
I'm not sure what the question was
Oh,
specifically.
sorry. It's about basketball court lighting hour adjustments during the summer.
Yeah, we'll be happy to work through, our parks team can work through that and Parks and Rec team just to make sure that we have, it aligns properly with the park hours, but also with the neighborhood that it may be in as well. So yeah, we can work through that offline.
Okay, I don't see any other hands raised. Okay, some are coming in. Are impact studies done in neighborhoods before organizations can start a program that will affect the parks?
No, we're not planning on doing any impact studies that I know of. I think we have some anecdotal information and some data just from some spaces that have seen some impacts. So some of the ways that we've outlined, like the food distribution permits, for example, we would utilize some of the information that we have from some spaces currently, just to make sure that we're minimizing any negative impacts and we can kind of maximize those positive benefits. But I think our team's going to continue tracking information to make sure that we're making informed decisions. Yeah, moving forward.
Okay, and then just clarifying question about where to find the 30 parks listed for food distribution. That is on both the project website as well as the Tempe Forum introduction. And so, again, we'll send those links directly out after via email to everyone registered for the Zoom if you're having trouble, but it will be on that, the park website, the project website.
And just to reinforce, we've identified 30 out of our 52 parks. And with that, we've got broad representation from across the city to make sure that we can at least support access into those spaces.
Okay, Craig, if you want to just go to the, I don't see any other questions coming in. If you wanted to go to the final or next steps to, yeah.
Yeah, so just a reminder, I appreciate everybody jumping on. Whether you've attended the meeting live on the 20th or you're revisiting it after the fact, we do appreciate just the overall community engagement around such an important topic. I know Tempe has been a space where we have seen immense interest in how we manage our parks and recreational facilities. And again, understanding that so many of our parks, we have more parks than we have square miles in Tempe, really do support quality of life, and that the feeling of safety in parks and in neighborhoods is certainly a focus of our mayor and council, but also for our staff as well. So we know that this is one of many tools that we have, but it's an important tool, and we really do want to make sure that we get this right. And with that, we do appreciate you taking the time to join us, filling out the survey from the 20th through May 3rd. Stand updated on the website where you'll find all of the support documents, sign up for email updates with the QR code, and then let other folks know that may be interested, whether you want to send them the link for this, ask them to fill out the survey. And then hopefully this really does support a good conceptual overview of what we're hoping to accomplish within the codes themselves. So I appreciate the patience as you're refreshing pages going through that, but thank you so much for taking the time to join us today, and we look forward to connecting with you in the coming weeks and months moving forward. Thanks, Shauna.